Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for Access City Council. I'm your host, City of Las Vegas Communications Director David Riggleman. Coming up on this show, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is proposing to build a temple in the Northwest Valley near Lone Mountain. It's an issue that's made headlines the past few months and has locals for it and against it. We're taking a deep dive into the proposal and the issues surrounding the plan. This new temple, if approved, would sit in Ward 4. So joining us to discuss this important topic is, of course, our Ward 4 City Councilwoman, Allen-Palenske. Welcome back to the program. How are you?
Thank you, Dave. It's always fun to be here.
We have dedicated the entire show to this topic because it is an important one. And as we mentioned, it's in Ward 4. You know the ward very well. For those of you out there maybe not exactly sure where Ward 4 is located, we're going to go ahead and show you on the map. It's basically, as we said, in the northwest area of the valley. Of course, it has the big 4 on it there. And the area that we're talking about in today's program really is the area around Lone Mountain. And Councilman, as I said, today we're discussing the proposed temple in Ward 4 near Lone Mountain. And Councilman, we should say right off the bat that no decision has been made.
None.
You have made no decision.
No.
And right now you are still in the information gathering mode to
Listening,
hear from all sides.
Learning.
You were hearing from people.
Hearing from people, outpour of communication. Before us is a very large stack of emails.
Wow.
The date of filming here, we're still 3 weeks before City Council, and that's the volume of emails.
How many is that, Councilman? It's got to be hundreds, or is it up to 1,000?
It's close to 1,000.
Yeah.
And
wow.
most every email has a name, a phone number, an address attached to it, and a person on the other end of that feels very strongly.
All right. So strong opinions, and you're getting plenty of feedback here.
That's not the text and the phone calls either. This is just one.
Exactly. And the meetings as well.
Yes.
So, Councilwoman, at this point, I would like to bring in our Community Development Director, Seth Floyd, to bring us up to speed on where this project stands. Seth, welcome to the program. You've been kind of front and center on this whole project. I guess, Seth, let's start at the beginning. Where is this exactly? We know it's near Lone Mountain, but where are we talking about? I think we have a graphic to help show this, too.
Yeah, thanks, David. I appreciate the opportunity to come on the show. You know, my team does a lot of work on all of our planning items leading up to City Council. So this particular project is located at Hickam and Grand Canyon. As you said, I think there is a graphic to show that. It is near Lone Mountain in an area of town that historically has been somewhat rural. Las Vegas is changing, but it's been historically somewhat rural. This was a request by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who owns a couple of parcels here, as you can see on the map, and they've requested to build a temple on that site. And so staff has reviewed that. It has gone to Planning Commission. We've had some public outreach meetings as well to talk about the project and answer some questions.
Seth, we saw different colored houses around there. We saw blue and gold. Help us understand what's the difference between some city, some county, I take it.
Yes, exactly. So we did that graphic because there was some confusion about this property is located right on the border of the city and the county. We call them county islands or donuts. You may have heard us refer to those as. But this shows the city parcels in blue and the county parcels in gold.
The temple itself will be in the city, right?
The temple itself is in the city. It's kind of it's a little hard to see it without a map. There's some moving lines there about where the city's jurisdiction is. But yes, the temple is in the city.
And then Seth, I think there's been a lot of talk about the temple, what it's going to look like, how high it's going to be. Councilwoman, I know that's been one of the salient points is the height of the temple and how prominent it's going to be on the landscape there. Seth, height it seems like that's one of the feedbacks that you've received, and Councilwoman, you as well, because we're talking how high is the proposed?
Yeah, so the temple as proposed, the entire height of the structure is 216 feet. It's got a few different components. The actual occupied building is about 63 feet. Give or take a few feet because there's some architectural features there. And then the spire is the remaining portion up to the 216 feet. Important point to note there, because we did get a lot of comments about the height of the building, and our code doesn't consider the spire itself to be part of the height calculation. So actually we consider the height that 63
That's for the building, and that's basically the building, the spire not included in that.
Correct, but the spire does go up to that 216 feet.
Seth, we've had a lot of meetings. Councilwoman has been involved. You've had a community forum. We had a planning commission meeting in May that brought thousands of people to City Hall.
I think it was probably the largest public meeting in City Hall history.
I've been at City Hall since we've been in this new building since 2012, and I've never seen a crowd that large. We were at capacity in chambers. We had thousands of people out on the plaza in front of the City Hall. We had people in overflow areas watching the meeting. It was a lot of strong feelings on both sides. Seth, set us up a little bit. What were the big issues here? It really seems like, and I think that where staff has been front and center, does it fit with the neighborhood? Does it fit in that location, which is, you had mentioned, somewhat rural around there?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, we've heard a lot of comments. There, as the councilwoman pointed out, there have been thousands of comments, hundreds of emails. I think the number one comment was about the height, and that's been a point of contention for the neighbors. And so we have spent a lot of time as staff analyzing that height and giving our analysis of that. But one thing to note is this project is in what we call a civic zone. So it has some unique and fairly flexible zoning requirements. It does not have a height limit that applies to it. And so when we analyze it, we're not considering whether that height is appropriate because it is allowed. They are allowed to request that height in this area. But I'd say that's the number one comment. Some neighbors feel like this is appropriate in the area, and some feel like it isn't. Yeah. There aren't a lot of other buildings in the area that are of this height, but there also aren't a lot of churches in this area either. So there's not an apples to apples comparison really that we can draw. Gotcha.
Councilwoman, I guess as we mentioned, the big issue is that we're expecting this to come before City Council on July 17th, where you and your colleagues will still have an opportunity to hear from the public before making a decision to vote on whether the temple should be located there or not.
There's an expected packed house again for City Council. And I don't know if we mentioned it, but because most of the folks waited in Planning Commission for over 6 hours, that we are doing something unique and special for this council meeting, allowing the public to understand and know that that agenda item will happen last and will happen not before 2 o'clock.
Exactly right. That's a great point, Councilwoman.
If you're interested in coming.
That's going to be a busy morning. We're swearing in newly elected officials that morning. So to kind of separate that so that we can have the morning session and then have this discussion in the afternoon. Again, Councilwoman's point, very important. This item is not going to start before 2 o'clock. It'll be the very last item on the City Council agenda. Councilwoman, we also want to mention you and I know Seth and his team are still gathering information, listening for the public. We want to mention there's a QR code that you're going to see throughout this show that gives you an opportunity to comment if you would like. And again, to have your comments placed on the public record, Seth, that would be part of the record of the meeting on July 17th. So if you scan that QR code, which you're going to see on the screen there, then between July 10th and July 16th, closing at 5 p.m., you'll have an opportunity to comment, and those comments would be part of the public record then. And Councilwoman, you are not shy about giving people the opportunity to speak their case.
When I say the door's always open, it is literally always open. And I might remind those folks that put in comments, all comments are welcome. We don't filter anything, but please make sure your comments are kind.
Yeah, that's this is a discourse, a civilized discourse, and we may not always agree on everything, but we still live in the same community. This is our community. This is your ward.
We're neighbors.
Exactly. So Seth, meeting coming up on the 17th. This would be final action then if the council so decides?
Yeah, so this project, and I didn't go through all this, but it has gone through Planning Commission. So the way these projects typically work, and this is from a land use entitlement perspective, a fairly typical project for us, at least as far as our review goes. It does go through, staff reviews the project, it goes to Planning Commission, and staff is recommending approval, by the way, if anyone pulls up the staff report by going to that link and going to the website for the
And you are, because there's nothing based on our code that would create an issue, although the issue of being harmonious is what the opponents exactly are raising. Does it fit? And that's the issue that the council would have to decide.
That's correct. Yeah, staff has reviewed it against our code. It does meet all of our code requirements, and that's what's reflected in our report. But it did go to Planning Commission. Planning Commission, after a pretty lengthy meeting with a lot of public comment, I believe it was 6-0. So it was a unanimous decision from Planning Commission to approve of that project. So it does go to City Council for their final vote.
All right. And everyone, we can show you one more graphic to show you to kind of give you some perspective on where this is located that we want to go ahead and bring up here. So at least kind of get it maybe more of a, almost like a 3D view of where this is. But again, it gives you some perspective on how this temple would fit into the area around there. It's a little complicated too, because we've got county and city together, as we've mentioned there. And it's very rural around there. And so I think that's part of the concern, is that will something that large fit in that rural setting? But again, Seth, to your point, our code doesn't really preclude that.
Our code doesn't preclude it. There is also a Clark County School District site adjacent to this one as well for future development of a school. So there is some development that will occur in the area. And the rendering here is a good place to point out that the temple itself is about 70,000 square feet. Mm-hmm. There's also a meeting house proposed on site that's roughly 2 stories with a shorter spire on top, and then some other grounds related.
20 acres all told?
It's 20 acres among 2 parcels all told. Okay. That's right.
All right. Seth Floyd, thank you so much. Looking forward to hearing more from you on July 17th, as well as you, Councilwoman. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break here. Our conversation on the proposed LDS Temple in the Northwest Valley continues after this short break. As I said, coming up, we'll look at the concerns over traffic and potential light pollution. That's after this, so please stay with us.
If you smoked, this new lung cancer screening could save your life. Visit SaveByTheScan.org.
Thanks for staying with us, everyone. You're watching Access City Council. Now, on July 17th, the City Council is expected to vote on an issue generating a lot of conversation in our community. It's the proposed LDS Temple near Lone Mountain. We should mention the QR code that you've been seeing throughout the show. This will direct you to information on public comment if you'd like to. You have from July 10th through July 16th at 5 p.m. to sign up online. Submit your comments. As we said, Councilwoman is still listening to all those comments. And again, your comments then would be part of the public record. Now, we're back with Ward 4 City Councilwoman Frances Allen-Palenske, and we're pleased to welcome our next guest to the show. He's our Deputy Director of Public Works. He's also our city's traffic engineer. He's Mr. Joe Norby. Joe, welcome to the program. It's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
Councilwoman, a lot of the opponents of this are saying that traffic is going to be a big problem. Those that are for the temple are saying, well, it's really not going to be that big of an impact. So we brought Joe in.
Our expert.
He is the expert. Joe, you do traffic studies. It's just part of your job. We do them all over the valley, right?
Absolutely. So any new development that comes to the city, big or small, requires some kind of traffic evaluation. Yeah. Depending on that size of the development, usually depends on the degree at which we evaluate the site.
What are you looking at, Joe? Things like what? Location, volume, things in the area that might generate people wanting to visit it? Is that basically it?
Yeah, so we look at what is the site use, what is it going to be used for? Is it going to be a school? Is it going to be a grocery store? Is it going to be a house of worship? You know, whatever that may be. And we evaluate how that is going to impact the surrounding area. Again, depending on how big that development is, may depend on how large that area of convergence that we analyze or that we look at, we take into account.
Councilwoman, of course, they've been studying this area. This is basically the area. So the temple obviously is the rectangle there in the middle. But you're studying clearly far around it then, from what it looks like.
Yeah, so generally speaking, something this size that generates, upwards of around 2,000 trips a day, we start looking beyond the site, what's the impact to some of the adjacent area? In this case, we're about a half mile to a mile area that we're looking at as part of this study.
All right, so Joe, Councilwoman and I have the $64 question for you. What have you found out? Is it going to be a nightmare, or is it not going to be that bad? Because we're hearing, I know you're hearing, Councilwoman, both ends of that spectrum.
Very much so.
Yeah. So it's interesting as we look at the impacts, as we look at what this is going to do on the area, we assign trips to any development, and we use some known benchmarks to say, hey, something this type of development is going to generate so many trips. An LDS temple and a chapel is a unique site. It doesn't follow
kind of
general basic
church,
traditional
right.
stuff.
Yeah, traditional school, whatever it might be.
And so as part of the study, what the applicant went ahead and did is they went and studied sites similar temple sites throughout the West. So they looked at a handful of sites in Utah and Arizona, and we used that as the basis of our traffic volume.
Seems fair.
So we're looking at like for like. So we're not trying to compare, in this case, one type of worship facility with another that may have a completely different use.
True.
What those studies kind of revealed was around 2,000 trips a day, in the range of just under 200 peak hour trips. So when we disperse that across the area, and we know that not everyone's going to come from one direction, people are going to come from all directions, depending on where they live or where they're coming from, what they're doing before or what they're doing after. And so when we look at and we disperse those 200 peak hour trips, that is both coming and going. So it's not 200 just coming, it's coming and going. So entering and leaving the site.
All right.
And you disperse that across, and you realize that not any one intersection is going to take that
All
big
those
of a
cars.
brunt
I see.
of the impact.
Okay. So, Joe, we've got some numbers to compare. So, basically, this doesn't sound like it would generate more than maybe a school, certainly not a shopping center or anything like that. I don't know. I guess, am I reading that right? Or
Yeah, so what we've kind of shown is looking at our CV developable area, what are some comparable sites that could develop on this site? And when you look at it, you look at a middle school and a high school, which we do have adjacent parcels designated for those as well. And you look at potentially a community center, something like on par with the Centennial Hills. We kind of see that it all fits within some of those similar daily traffic volumes that we would expect.
So, in a nutshell, Councilwoman, I think we're saying it looks like that
Smack dab in the middle.
Yeah, you're not really talking about a tremendous amount of new traffic generated from this.
Yeah, so it's new traffic because there's nothing there today. There's going to be something there when we're done, but we're not generating anything that the roadway network
Would be overwhelmed.
is going to be overwhelmed.
Right.
So as part of that, we looked at each of those intersections around the temple
The blue
site,
dots.
those little blue dots on the screen, and we look at, okay, if we distribute the trips and they come through that dot, what is that going to do to that intersection? And we have a benchmark that we compare things to, and all of those fall well within acceptable levels.
Councilwoman, our experience is that Joe and his team are pretty good at this.
They're accurate. They know what they're talking about.
It's not the first development we've had in our city, certainly not. He's done this for years, and we've got a high level of confidence that he and his team bring us good data. So,
Absolutely,
I believe
no
in that
doubt.
here too. So, all right, Joe. So that will be very salient, I think, on July 17th when people have that perspective of hearing, well, this is kind of what our traffic experts are expecting if the temple were to be built there. Joe, the other thing that we're hearing about is potential light pollution, the temple height being lit up. That's something I know that we pay attention to at the city as well, because when we build roads, we have street lights, all of that is taken into consideration as well. So that's something we're sensitive to as well, correct?
Correct. So it's something we always take a look at. We want to understand not just the vehicular, but what is this going to do for the area? How is this going to fit, in this case, into a rural preservation or adjacent to a rural preservation area that doesn't have street lights, that doesn't have some of those things? And the nice thing about technology is lighting is getting so much better.
Yeah, for sure.
LED lighting today is a little bit more pinpoint than some traditional lighting of even 15, 20 years ago, where you'd get that heavier glow of lighting around a site. Now, with shielding and with some full cutoff and following with specifications that have been set forth, we can really keep a lot of that lighting specifically to the site and not see a lot of spillover
For example,
to the adjacent neighborhoods.
Joe, Councilwoman, maybe the parking lot or around the building itself, because it's a large parcel, and I know that's been some of the concern of the neighbors, what's going to be lit up all the time and cause, even in the parking lot area. But again, to your point, Joe, we've learned that with our own street lights, that we can direct the light more down versus dispersed everywhere.
Absolutely, and we're seeing that. A lot of our LED conversions that we're doing across the city on our roadway network are implementing that same technology, where we're really trying to keep this lighting out of the backyards of the neighborhoods that are adjacent to it.
On the roads.
And really on the road, or really onto the site.
Councilman, you hear that all the time. A new development comes in, we're going to build a road or whatever, and that's a concern. It's like, well, is it going to be in my back window now? So, all right. Well, Joe Norby, listen, thanks so much. Really appreciate you. I know you'll be called upon a lot on July 17th. I have a hunch.
I'm sure I will.
You'll be
That's all
ready.
right.
I think you'll be ready. You always are. You and your team
See you there.
do a great job. So, everyone, we have to take another quick break. But when we come back, a law that could play a factor in the outcome of the proposed temple, what it is, and how it could impact what happens next. We'll tell you right after this.
Touchdown! Did you see that? Whoa, we scored? Yeah, we scored. We're in the playoffs.
Thanks so much for staying with us, everyone, as we discuss the proposed LDS temple in the Northwest Valley. Again, the City Council is expected to vote on the issue July 17th at that meeting. Once again, the QR code that you've seen throughout the show will direct you to information on public comment if you'd like to do so. You have from July 10th through July 16th at 5 p.m. to sign up online. And again, your comments would then be part of the record, which will help Councilwoman and the rest of her colleagues make a decision in this important issue. So let's get back to our discussion. There's a federal law that could play a factor in this vote. The law that we're referring to is called RLUIPA. Now that stands for the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. Doesn't really roll off the tongue, but the law protects individuals, houses of worship, and other religious institutions from discrimination in zoning and land marking laws. So Councilwoman Frances Allen-Palenske and I, we just continue our conversation, and we're joined now with our final guest. We're pleased to welcome Deputy City Attorney with the City Attorney's Office, John Rodella. John, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate you being here and helping round out this thing. So help us understand, I've described what RLUIPA is about, but is it likely to play a role in this discussion, potentially?
Hey, David, let me give you a little background. When the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act was declared to be unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court as it applies to states and local governments, Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah and Senator Edward Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts pushed for the passage of RLUIPA.
Two different sides of the aisle. Interesting. Yeah.
Yes, in a bipartisan manner, it was passed by unanimous voice vote by both the Senate and the House, and was signed by President Bill Clinton on September 22nd, 2000. So we're in the approximately 24th year of its implementation.
So do you see, John, I guess the idea is that it protects, in that case that Senator Kennedy and Senator Hatch were dealing with, there was a temple issue, right, that was in Boston, or a large church, I believe it was, and there was issues about whether or not it could be zoned there. That was the heart of the discussion, right?
Yeah, there was a series of litigation that led to its eventual passage in various jurisdictions across the United States where Congress felt that it needed to step in to provide some federal guidance to guide local governments to ensure that constitutional protections were guaranteed to the citizens. So that's what eventually led to its passage.
Gotcha. Well, Councilman, obviously, in all the discussion we've had, we want to make sure that we're not having issues.
To follow the law.
Especially the federal law, too. We don't want to have an issue there. And so, John, the discussion, obviously, this our RLUIPA law is something that has been something, obviously, your office and your colleagues have been making sure that we're reviewing as well, right?
Yeah, there's multiple factors that you have to evaluate when it comes to a religious land use. And there's certain criteria in RLUIPA that have to be followed, or you would potentially engender a visit from the Department of Justice.
Yeah, right.
The tests are substantial burden, equal treatment, non-discrimination, exclusion, and unreasonable limitations. And perhaps the most important part is a substantial burden.
Yeah.
Is you can't substantially burden a religious practice or land use change to a religious use if there's not a compelling government interest. And even if there is a compelling government interest, you have to use the least restrictive means as possible.
Okay. So in this situation around the proposed temple site in the Northwest, what would be some factors if people are saying, well, it's too high, or that's obviously something that would RLUIPA touch on that then?
Potentially. The applicant came to the city for the changes of land use in the area, and we have certain code provisions that require certain limitations on height, densities, parking, and such, meeting the traffic requirements that you just discussed. So as long as they're compliant with the city's code, we sort of have an obligation to consider that in the approval of the project.
Because otherwise, I guess, Councilwoman, the argument could be made, well, it fits the code, so what we're doing is you're discriminating against them because maybe you don't like the religion, or maybe it's
because they're them.
Because they're them, right. So
And David, I would like to read a quote from RLUIPA. I think it's
please,
very relevant.
John, please, this is really helpful.
Is that Congress mandated a broad interpretation of RLUIPA and should be interpreted, and I quote from the law, in favor of a broad protection of religious exercise to the maximum extent permitted by the terms of RLUIPA and the Constitution, and the use, building, or conversion of real property for the purpose of religious exercise shall be considered to be a religious exercise of the person or entity that uses or intends to use the property for that purpose.
So boiled down, you're saying that
the practice of actually using the land for religious use is protected by RLUIPA.
Okay, all right.
And the Department of Justice issued a document in 2020 on the 20th anniversary where they have participated in 485 investigations.
That's why you were reading my mind. That was going to be my next question. How many have they had?
25 actual lawsuits, and they filed 29 amicus briefs on behalf of different organizations.
Yeah, Friends of the Court briefs. So, okay. So they take this seriously, and so we are too.
and Congress specifically authorized the Department of Justice to intervene on these cases. So, because a lot of smaller religious organizations don't have the financial wherewithal to pursue these types of lawsuits, they actually authorized, the DOJ has a whole division of RLUIPA implementation and lawsuits.
They're serious.
They are. Well, John, thank you so much. That's really helpful understanding how that plays into, the whole discussion, because that's something we're going to need to be cognizant of, the council, obviously. And I know that you and your colleagues, City Attorney Jeff Dorkak, yourself, will obviously make sure the council is aware of the impacts of what we need to follow on all of that. So thank you so much for being with us. We're going to ask you just to please stay put for a second, because Councilwoman and I have just a couple of quick housekeeping items. I'm going to tell people you have some upcoming events that are pretty cool.
Fun time of year.
Exactly. The first is your blast off in the basin. Now, we know that some of you are going to see this after the fact, but for those of you maybe who are going to catch it beforehand, 4th of July, 7 o'clock, Buckskin Basin, you and Councilwoman Bruni on a big fireworks show.
Best place in the valley to celebrate Independence Day. It's great family fun. Come on out. My family will be there. Hope you can join us. Only place in town where fireworks and music
I like it.
choreographed together.
And you know what? And please don't fire them off, illegal fireworks in your neighborhood. Come to this. Have a good time. It's free. Did we mention, Councilwoman? It's free. I'd love to have you out, and it's a great show. Music, the fireworks with the music, it's good stuff, and we're not skimping on this. It's awesome. And then, I hate to tell you this, kids, but we're already talking about back to school. You've got a back to school and movie in the park. It's like, what? We just got out. What's he talking about? So that's going to be August 2nd. Am I reading this right? The whole thing kind of begins at what time? 4:30 in the afternoon? You're going to kind of have the initial thing and then the movie later on?
There's going to be some pre-partying before the movie
Got some
starts.
pre-gaming at the of the movie. Okay, all righty. In a good way, everyone. So what we're talking about. But so Madagascar's the movie. Great movie.
We're going to have a snow cone food truck out there and popcorn. It's always fun.
Awesome. All right. Well, Councilwoman, thank you so much. Looking forward to that. John Rodella, thank you. Councilwoman, thank you. We want to tell everybody out there, we always want to hear from you. So if there's something you'd like to share with Councilwoman Palenske, you can find her at 702-229-6405 or send her an email. Her address is fpalenske@lasvegasnevada.gov. You can also visit our website, the Ward 4 website, or subscribe to the Councilwoman's newsletter, which you can see right there. We have a QR code on the screen as well. Councilwoman, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. We'll have you back in 6 weeks with another update from Ward 4. The council will probably have voted on the temple by then, so we'll be able to give everybody an update on that as well. John, thank you as much. And folks, please don't miss our next show beginning on July 18th with Ward 5 City Councilman Cedric Creer. You can catch all of our KCLV shows on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire. Also, watch for our QR code after this show to subscribe to our newsletter. And don't forget, you can watch us live on the internet at kclv.tv. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time around.